Welcome back to Shining the Light on Our Prejudices with the Enneagram. We will be starting our session 3 here with asking some questions about how we can use the Enneagram uh, to identify our prejudices and to see how we can incorporate the body into our practices.
Well, Sarah and I are really glad that you're back with us again, doing this important work. And we hope that these were questions that will just give you further opportunity to reflect on how this amazing tool in the Enneagram can help us to live uh, just better lives where we treat each other with greater respect by working on ourselves individually, but seeing how the power, and when we do our personal work, it helps us to do our corporate work in the world. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to be in touch with Sarah and I, but we're very thankful you're on this journey with us.
So we've talked a little bit about instincts. I'm curious now about our specific types. And so how does your type impact your sensitivity to prejudice in your community?
How does me personally or just in general?
If you're able to talk to both.
It's okay. It's interesting because I lead with a type 8. And so I'll be frank with you. The topic of racism has not been on my radar until, relatively recently in my adult life. Why? Because as a challenger, um, I set my own rules. I march to my own drumbeat. I'm not really conscientious about what other people think about me. You might not like Asian people. That doesn't impact my life. So I personally have had to learn through the Enneagram that others don't see the world necessarily that way, like I do. And so I've been able to um, uh, I've been able to access more compassion for all the other types in the circle, who might be more sensitive and hurt by racism, you know. So using that example, the Enneagram, it allowed me to open up my perspective and show empathy and compassion, and also I think also for me, pay attention to my instinctual nature to protect people and taking on issues that are not my own. Racism is a systemic problem, and it can't that can't fall upon, the strong 8s and the 1s and the 3s, the social advocates. I mean, it's a systemic problem and it requires a systemic solution. And I think for me, it brought to my attention how, like, I really have to be aware of when I interject myself, you know. I can't save the world. I think challengers and reformers sometimes, impulsively from their somatic body sense, act without considering the inadvertent damage that it can cause. Not only, I mean, the intention, the underlying intention might be one of love and support, but I feel like rescuing people. I mean, I've learned that it can be a disservice to that person's growth. And so now that's my personal answer. I think in general, I think it's important for um, all nine types are looking at the world through different lenses, right? So they're looking at the world, they're observing people's behavior, and they're interpreting it in 9 different ways. And we can inadvertently dismiss one another's impressions or feelings by projecting our own interpretation of what's happening. And that's where the Enneagram, I think, is just crucial in improving communications and mutual understanding. So, we're not jumping to conclusions, and we're not dismissing people's feelings. And yeah, that's my answer.
I think you've already kind of touched on it, but maybe we invite you to go a little bit deeper into it. How can the Enneagram help us to see beyond our differences? And we're saying we can look at any difference, whether it's color of skin, sexual orientation, whether we're
Religion.
disabled, or offer the proper languages for that. So how do you see it helping us to see beyond our differences? And go back to what you said earlier about we probably have a lot more that's similar than different.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, it's the Enneagram, I feel, fosters a safe space for exploration. Ultimately, what makes this tool unique is its ability to elucidate underlying motivations. And so, a behavior can be interpreted in 9 different ways. And just to be among, I think for me, it's like one of the best friends that I've made in the Enneagram is an African-American gentleman from a totally different background than me as a person from Asian immigrant family. And we were able to see beyond our differences because we were diving deep into our underlying motivations and our habitual patterns. And we start to recognize that we're more similar than we are different. I mean, to take a quote from Russ Hudson, everybody on this earth is brokenhearted. And that was a huge breakthrough to realize that, these feelings that I have and these feelings that you have are similar, regardless of our cultural overlays and religious overlays, gender, ethnicity. It's like we share in these feelings, and it's like all the 9 types have different ways of coping with these feelings. And to meet, especially to meet other people who are from the same Enneatype, that really takes the edge off of this being personal. There's just 9 different ways of being, and it was really healing and reassuring to be among others who really understand how I cope with anger, for example, and shame and fear, and then to hear how other types are coping in their own unique ways, and it becomes a very objective assessment, and to me it feels like it takes out the emotion in exploring emotions. We can just sit here and have a frank discussion about it and understand that we're not alone. And that's why this tool, I've been saying for quite some time, this is such an amazing tool to chip away at racism, because it provides a safe space for people from polarized points of view to meet in a mutual understanding of common feelings. So that's my answer.
We've kind of touched a little bit upon microaggressions. And so I'm wondering if you could go a little bit deeper into it and just kind of define what it is and what it looks like and how it impacts you, or if it does impact you.
Okay, so I would define microaggression as an inadvertent, I guess it's inadvertent discrimination, right? To me, yeah, I would say inadvertent discrimination. The person is not intentionally trying to harm or ridicule or criticize another person. It's their way of their way of being, the way that they were raised within their community and their culture, influence them to have these certain beliefs about another group of people, and they don't even realize that viewpoint is inaccurate. So I'll give you an example in my life. So I'm married to a Caucasian woman here in North Carolina, and we go out to dinner at the restaurant, and I would say 9 times out of 10, the waiter or waitress asks us if we're going to split the check. And my wife gets really bent out of shape about that. She's very offended by that inquiry. We're we both got wedding rings on. We're sitting here, and maybe there's the assumption that we're colleagues. I don't know. I mean, I personally don't mind it. Ironically, I'm the person of color here, and I just blow it off. Like, I'm like, hey, babe, like, how many Asian people did you grow up around, like in school? Like, she had like one Chinese person in her high school, right? So why would anybody in your social sphere growing up why would they presume that if they see a Caucasian woman and an Asian man together, that they would automatically conclude that they're married? I mean, that's so far-fetched out of their reality, right? So like, I can empathize with that, because frankly, if I grew up in that environment, I would probably have the same worldview of interracial couples. I'd be like, oh yeah, they're colleagues, right? so so to me, that's a microaggression. And I think that it's an opportunity to educate people. I mean, instead of getting all like angry and bent out of shape, and it's like, it's an opportunity to educate somebody who literally is naive and doesn't know any better, So what that might look like in a restaurant setting was like, oh, this is going to be on the same check, and hug my wife, it's my lovely wife, just like, let people know that, this is real, and sorry, in this country, there are more interracial couples out there. So I've seen numerous cases where people get really angry from microaggressions, and I just don't see how that helps the situation. If anything, that just alienates and ridicules and shames the other person for something that they not even aware of, and that just results in more divisiveness, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
Do you think of other, and maybe not what you've experienced, but some other examples of what might be microaggressions?
Other examples of microaggressions. Like I said, you're talking to somebody who leads with a challenger energy, who's not sensitive to microaggressions.
Oh, okay.
So I'm trying to, if I'm not sensitive to microaggressions, I'm probably not attuned to witnessing other microaggressions, because my take is, well, I mean, how does that person's perception of you influence your life? Like, you go home and you're bent out of shape and pissed off about it, and the other person's at home eating ice cream. Like, I honestly, I don't pay much attention to it. So if I had to really think about like microaggressions, inner microaggression, let's see. Yeah, microaggression. Oh yeah. So microaggression might be, oh, you're an Asian person, and you must know karate or something.
Okay.
Or you're a Black person, and does your family like chicken? I mean, that's a stereotype, right? And the thing is, the difference between microaggression and racism, to me, is that racism is, I feel like there's an intention to harm there. There's there's a discharge of that self-hatred. There's an intention to harm. I feel like microaggression is like, yeah, growing up, like, I just watched a bunch of TV shows, and there was like Bruce Lee, and there are people who like practice karate. So I just assume like all Asian people know karate. Like, nobody's educating me on that. I'm not here to like embarrass you or criticize you for that. It's just, I don't know any better,
Mm-hmm.
And this is a situation actually came up with this Black man that I met in the Enneagram, and like, he thought that was the thing. And I was like, no, actually, it's not a rite of passage to learn karate in Chinese culture. And he found that illuminating, and that was an opportunity for us to bond. And it's another thing it's another thing, I think, to use that against me, right? If it was like, instead of approaching you with curiosity, I'm going to use this stereotype against you in a way, to criticize you or ridicule you. Now the intent shifts, and to me, that's outright. That's racism.
I recently heard something. It was actually just this morning that I heard this phrase from somebody, and I'm curious what your reaction to this would be. Is this person said that what matters the most is the impact of what you have said rather than the intent behind it.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's not a lesson that I knew before the Enneagram.
Yeah, that was something that I just heard for the first time today, and I was like, wow, that really touched me a lot. And I was wondering if other people also felt the same way about that.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel the same way. I mean, my intent is often one of love and kindness. But depending on my delivery, and the word choice, it can be perceived in 9 different ways. You could argue 27 different ways with the subtypes. And so for me, it's a matter of like, the question is, what is effective, right? What is an effective way for me to communicate my message to the person that I'm speaking to? And regardless of my intent, if it's ineffective, who cares about the intent? If it's ineffective, then it's not productive, and it can actually lead to misunderstanding and strife and all sorts of problems. So I can make the excuse that my intention wasn't to cause any disharmony, but what does that do for the disharmony? It sounds defensive, and it sounds like a cop out, actually, and a lack of accountability. So yeah, I think it's all about impact, and the impact is, second, the impact is a function of how the other person is receiving the message, and then being able to customize one's message in a way that is effective.
Moving on here. Another question. I'm sure you could talk for hours about this one too. How can working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
I often find the instinctual stack kind of sets us up for how we start judging things. And one of the things I learned early on is, my stack is dominant, social, sexual, just underneath it, and then way down self-pres. And kind of recognizing how my judgments of people, if they weren't putting as much thought into their social connections, really disturb me. Like, come on, that we're all in this together. And other times judging people for taking time for themselves. Like, come on, just like give it up. And recognizing the cost that has to myself. And when learning that self-pres was my blind spot, I started noticing how much harm I was doing to myself by judging others, for asking for breaks. At this time, I was working in an area where I had lots of meetings. And, if somebody asked for a break, we need to go to the washroom, my first thought was like, 10 more minutes is when it's scheduled, back to the quantity of time. And it's like, just tying on in it. But during that time, when I got home from work, I would be running from the car into the house because I had not gone all day. By paying attention to my judgment allowed me to, when someone spoke up, to do a check-in with my own body to say, oh yeah, let's take a break. We can readjust the schedule, etc. And so in addressing our prejudice is to take every judgment and turn it into curiosity, in a way that allows us to be fully grounded, because we need all 3 of those instincts to survive. And And so as we hear ourselves judging, to start asking questions about it, to start exploring what is it that maybe I'm judging within myself that I do too often or that I don't do enough, can lead me to help understand another person's situation in a different way. So that's what I would say is the greatest gifts of the instincts is turning our judgments into curiosity and recognizing that every prejudice is a judgment.
I'm kind of wondering how can working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
Well, if we really pay attention to our instincts, and that's one of the biggest problems with even having them is that we ignore them. We're not aware they're there, but we're not paying attention to, that knowing that is in the gut, so many times in situations that involve racism and homophobia, someone will see something and it will strike them in their gut that this is just wrong. It's just wrong, but they'll remain silent. To me, that's no different than, say, being a mother and you have that gut feeling that something's going wrong with your child. And you pick up the phone and you call the school and you recognize that, yes, indeed, something was wrong. That child is sick. So if we pay attention to our gut wisdom, when we see something, we'll learn to say something or we'll learn to do something. One of the most important things is the wisdom that comes from our head, from the instinct of the head center. If we will allow ourselves to go to a place of recognizing that there are things that we have to unlearn and open our minds and recognize that we have to unlearn some things that are painful, and then we have to relearn some things because we were all set up to fail. We were set up based on a kind of altered history that when we went to school, we all studied. And so arguing with people, particularly from a space, a head-centered sort of dynamic, is not going to get us anywhere. What has to happen is we have to actually activate in our head center, in our heart center, and in our gut center. The information has to go in here, but it has to drop down into our hearts. And when our hearts crack open, the wisdom of the gut center will open up and allow us to actually move into action and to be able to do what is needed to be done. It's the activation of our three centers that really creates the possibility and the opening and the transformation into allies and advocates.
Our last question is around the instincts. And just wondering, I don't know how much you've studied the instincts, but how does working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
I think it's a great question, Roland, and I'm curious about what brought you there. I mean, you're obviously, I did go on your website. You're very knowledgeable.
Oh, thank you.
I feel like I'm a baby with the instincts, although I've done 2 Enneagram Institute trainings, one online and one in person, about the instincts. I'm exploring bringing movement to them. And I think once I do the movement to it, I may have a better answer. Understanding our blind spot and our dominant instinct. And what I love about how the Institute teaches it is that we can balance these. We are not a slave to this dominant one. That to come into balance which is what we all want. Our bodies are always seeking homeostasis. We need balance. We need both the masculine, the feminine, the yin and the yang, right? This is what the world is off balance right now because too much damn yang, right? The 8 is too much. You know what I mean? We need to soften. And so the instincts out of control, even if it's self-pres that's dominant and is overused, creates an imbalance. And when there's imbalance, I mean, you look at white supremacy, how it's not balanced. It's one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. And, you know, white lady, you just agree to do this and we'll make you better than that one. You're not as good as I am, but at least you're and then you're not so low as that one. It's that whole trip. And so if we can create this balance of equality, of that equanimity, of that truly balancing equity of what people are talking about, I feel that's what I'm doing with my instincts right now. I have been developing my self-pres. I've been working on it during COVID. And I can sense the more that I attune to it and recognize the instinct of preserving myself, setting better boundaries emotionally, stopping and not doing so much, and just resting. I mean, these things, it's like I have more clarity. I can perceive in my body with more clarity. I don't feel out of balance when, you know, COVID sort of forced it, right? Because if my sexual and my social were still like, come on, it didn't work. And no matter what I did to try to make it work, it wasn't working. And so it kind of forced me to go there. So I'm answering the question. The only way I know how is through my body. That if there's this balance, if I can take care of myself and still have my vibrant, powerful energy out in the world and create community and connect with others. And I can do that in a balancing energy, then I can attune and begin to see the world that is possible in balance. That's what it feels like to me. And I can feel it in my pelvis. I can feel it. There's like this calm energy just when I breathe in there, this idea that through our own bodies and our consciousness of this work with the Enneagram and the instincts, because when one's out of whack, and I think that's kind of what the teachings tell us, if I'm not mistaken, Roland, you can stop me if I'm not.
Keep going. You're right on track.
Okay. But just that I'm grounded, I'm centered. I still have strong, powerful energy, but I'm with myself and I'm not needing external validation about anything. I'm just true to this. And then what comes out is more authentic. And then if I can do that with my own self, and I can feel that level of compassion and love for myself and feel that balancing energy at the very base of my body, then we can find peace. We can find balance. If I can do that in my own universe, in my own ecosystem, then that's possible in all ways, no matter what. That's the best that I can answer it.
Thank you. As we can continue to explore how the Enneagram can help us around prejudice and racism, we're curious about how can working on our instincts help us address our prejudices?
Speaking with regards to self-pres, social, one-on-one?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, man. I mean, I've been studying Enneagram for 6 years now, and the very first course I took was instincts, and it really set the foundation because these are aspects of our being that are innate in being human. And so I think bringing awareness to how much of our behavior is just automatic, it's habitual and reinforced by the strategies that we employ are reinforced when they're successful, and so I think it's crucial to bring attention to the instincts. I think the basis of racism is tribalism. I mean, that's what it is. It's objectifying groups of people and dehumanizing them and being fearful of them as being different from one's own tribe, right? And so, all of the instincts come into play, the social instinct and relating to my own tribe and relating to that of the other tribe, and the of course the sexual one-on-one instinct and exerting influence and dominance and hierarchy. I mean, that's an animalistic instinct that's, I think, imperative to the discussion of racism. And then you have the self-preservation instinct, which is like, I mean, this very sad, in my opinion, sad perception that my gains are mutually exclusive from yours. Like, my gain is your loss, and that the deeply embedded fear that I have to hoard resources so that I survive, and that survival of the fittest. I mean, it all plays in. So I don't think we, as a general statement, I don't think we sit around pondering instincts much. And if we did, it might be an opportunity to cultivate more empathy between different groups of people, to realize, hey, we're more similar than we are different. I mean, that's really the way that you overcome racism, and the Enneagram has the ultimate tool to achieve that.
So, Catherine, how can working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
So I know I've touched on it a bit by this level of introspection and recognizing. I can be, I guess, more explicit. So this level of introspection and recognizing I have a belief or bias that's coming up, there's usually some kind of gut reaction component that comes with it. We have like oh, that's unsettling. This moment where we recognize maybe, oh, I just said something that I haven't questioned before. For example, we have a lot of ableist language in our everyday talk and vernacular. So even there's like a really popular show on Netflix right now called Love is Blind. So it's on the top of my mind right now of how often we use the word blind, for example, really kind of carelessly in the world, and a lot of metaphor as well. Well, I don't think that the intent has always been very malicious in usage. It's this moment where, as you recognize, oh, this could be an ableist comment, unintentionally perhaps, but even still, is there another word I could use? Literally any other word other than blind in this context? And just being more deliberate and conscious to how we're showing up in the world. And so this gut instinct of like, oh, okay, I recognize that I want to use this term because it's something I've colloquially used a lot, but I can take a moment, pause, think for just a few seconds, what other amazing words in the broad English vernacular that we have could I reframe this as? And so for me, that's just one small example for how when we notice something come up for ourselves, this like icky feeling of, oh, wow, this stems from something I've now learned is racist or homophobic or ableist or fatphobic. There's all of these things that we are now learning. We can take a moment of pause and reflection and say, is this even reflective of what I'm wanting to say? Is this reflective of what I want to be doing? It gives us a moment to really act within the values that we want to have as the person we are now. Now that we know better, we want to do better. How are we showing up in the world? So Are these the types of instincts that you're referencing?
Like social, sexual, and self-preservation.
Okay, so you meant more specific to the Enneagram. Okay, all right. So working on our instincts, social 101 and self-preservation. Well, these are all definitely a balance. And I think it really depends which one that you find you lean on the heaviest as your dominant instinct of action in the world. And I think that all of us, we all need all of them, but I find that we have our own areas of growth. So I know I tend to lean on a self-preservation instinct, and it's been a lot of unlearning in my relationship of a lot of my self-preservation instincts have been born out of white values, white cultural values, a lot of independence, do it yourself, resource mindsets. And if we're talking shadow sides, a little bit of hoarding of resources might also be something that really comes from a lot of white cultural value around that independence and bootstraps mentality that I was raised with in the United States. Living in my partner's family structure really burst that dam right open of seeing how it is to operate from other instinctual perspectives. So for example, my partner's family is very social instinct minded. Everything is very communal. Your time is communal. Your resources are communal. If there's a mindset of what is mine is yours. And also when you're having a bad day, I'm here for you, and vice versa. So there's a lot more of this importance on the community as a whole. And so what I think is also something that we find and we need to seek balance is anything you're doing too much of is too much. It's like, if you're oversharing, it's oversharing. You could still share, but like this relationship to the idea of what are we doing too much of, and too much of anything can be harmful. So there are times in a social environment where an individual's needs can get lost in service of the community, where I feel that sometimes leaning on a self-preservation instinct can be a good thing in balance if something is being done too much in the social instincts, for example. But for me, especially, it's been a lot of unlearning, a lot of my overusing of self-preservation instinct, and learning a different way to operate in the world from another perspective. So yeah, I think that, having this opportunity to recognize that no one is wrong for how they're surviving in this chaotic spinning marble through space, that we've all developed these instincts out of a survival response to our environment. But that presence and that cognition of being very aware of how we're operating in the world can make all the difference in addressing our prejudices as well. So that awareness of, I'm coming at this from a self-preservation instinct, which I see a lot of relationship to white cultural values in. This is an opportunity for me to invite that one-on-one or sexual instinct or that social instinct that is not my usual go-to, so that I don't have my same defenses flared up. I'm still going to survive. I'm going to be okay if I use another style to get what my needs are. So, yeah.
Another question is, how can working on our instincts being our sexual, social, and self-preservation, to help us address our prejudices?
That's a question that may have stumped me the most. Now, I'm self-predominant. And so possibly I would fall into the category of those who would be more cautious and be more worried about scarcity of resources. I consider myself a healthy 9, by the way. I hope I am. And I hope I'm a healthy self-pres now. But that goes back to the issues that I mentioned when you asked me about how I define racism, and I thought fear of scarcity was one of them. And that perception, I mean, how do you change that perception without doing work like the Enneagram work, right? So it goes back to scarcity versus abundance. It also goes back to helping people to see, and this is not just Enneagram, it's coaching combined with Enneagram, helping people to see that we all have beautiful potential. Just because society seems to give us messages that you've got to be like a doctor or a lawyer, I mean, that's very prevalent in Asian society, for example, doesn't mean that the other personalities don't equally have something of high value. So the first thing I say to clients is, I truly believe that everyone has beautiful potential and already has unlimited capacity to reach that potential if you are willing and ready to do that work and to have faith that it's true. So affirming people's value, yeah, that's a huge thing. So instinct work is really about relaxing, right? Relaxing the dominant fear that's in overdrive. And I was in a session with B and Uranio at CP Enneagram, and they said it's like becoming the dog whisperer. Watch the dog whisper in action, because because the dog thinks the people, which is really our ego, it's not really the ego, it's the essence is not in charge. The people are not in charge. And so the ego has to take over and protect, right, the essence. And so it's barking, for example, at every visitor coming to the door, and they can't control it, and it's on a long leash and in control. And what he showed us is how you take the dog on a short leash and you talk to it in a very calm, confident way to let it, know that the adult is actually in charge and does know how to keep everybody safe. So, it's working with the fear, calming it down. Same thing with, the fear of racism. And once you know it's the issues of the unknown, so, checking out what you're barking at.
I like that.
I like that. Yeah, what am I barking at? That's a good question.
Yeah.
We had a dog that liked to bark a lot. She just died a few days ago, but she was very vocal. So,
to some extent, we all bark at the moon.
yes.
So I have another question for you. How can working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
Ooh, yeah, this is a good question. So our instincts, self-preservation, social, and sexual, or one-to-one as some people call it, working on them is so important to for us to unlock the reasons we react the way that we do so strongly to certain things, right? So whether we believe X, Y, Z or not, or whatever, our instincts is what makes us react to them in a way that is very, very, very selfish and ego-oriented. So if we're looking at self-pres, there's a way that I literally, if I'm not careful of working on my instinct, that I only care about me and whatever my small group or whatever that it cares about. I don't care about nothing else, nobody else out there. And so it makes me very selfish. It makes me very dangerous because maybe I'm going to take something that someone else may need, or I'm going to take too much of something and I can actually share with other people, right? So I'm not thinking about how does this affect the whole group? How does this affect someone else? It's really selfish. And so for me to work on that, it says, okay, right. So there's a buffet line here, Milton, and you're the first person in line, which you ran to be in front of the line, but don't take so much food that other people can't get food, right? Or have the opportunity to do it. That's not okay either. So working on the self-praise helps with that, right? And so looking at the social instinct, working on that. Social instinct is the way that a lot of our structures, systems and structures and communities are designed. So I think of city council, more I think of government, right? And so the hardest part about that is that it can be so cold when you talk about dealing with people, because now it just looks in groups and it looks at numbers. And it's not looking at there's individual people in here that are being affected. And so decisions need to be thought of. Yes, we got to think of it in mass. We got to think of structure, but we also got to think about what about the people here? What about the hearts? What about the individuals, right? And so looking at it from the standpoint of social, if we're not careful, we will systematically put things in place and do things that are maybe they're helpful for a certain group of people, but they're horrible for another group, right? It's just so happened this group makes us more money. So we're going to put this in place, right? We'll be fine, right? And so it's dismissing the value of people and a lot of people. So delving down and dialing down my social instinct is important, because now I have to look at, oh, within this structure that we've created, we're talking about, there's individual people that have individual lives that are all extremely valuable. So now I got to really think about this. How can we do this? So that's one. And then looking at the sexual or one-to-one as an instinct and working on my instinct, right? And not just thinking that this person or this one thing that I am so engorged or fascinated with or so intense and passionate about, it's not the only thing out there. It's not. Like there's also me, but there's also other people as well, like that I have to make sure that I include in the way that I live my life. I can't just live like this is the person, the most important thing, whatever they agree with, I agree with, and I'm not including myself or I'm not including everybody else, because now I'm taking from the humanity of tons of different people. So that's one of the, I guess that's three of the reasons of like kind of dialing down and working on our instincts so that we're not going out there and really harming more than we're helping, because this happens a lot. It's this confusion that we're doing a great job, but it's all instinctual and we're actually really hurting a lot of people.
The last question is, before we'll, at the end, we'll give you a chance to say anything that you haven't had a chance to say yet. But how can our work on our instincts and address our prejudices?
Well, our instincts being kind of our head, heart, and gut. And so it's paying attention to what our body is telling us. And so if there's discomfort around something that you might experience or witness related to maybe a bias that someone has experienced, it's to sit with it and to see what it has to say to you around that experience, and what part am I in that, and what can I do? How can I be more of an ally? How could I have dealt with it differently or stepped in, or those kinds of things? To be curious. And if we're grounded, I think, and notice those things in the moment, it can help us to respond differently in the moment than what our inherent bias might otherwise lead us to do.
We're also thinking of the instincts being the sexual, social, and self-preservation too.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't live this the same way that you guys do, so I sometimes forget and get them mixed up.
Okay. I think I appreciated what you said about the tri-types.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as a dominant social, like I would be, and I think this is somewhat could be connected to my passion for social justice, although there's multiple levels to that. But I think my wanting to have a social connection, or the importance of that, the other level of that is the distress when there's social disconnection, and that would connect as well to a 9, that fear of being disconnected. And so when there's bias, I mean, I have always, I think, had that inherent feeling of concern at injustice against somebody else. So my initial kind of entrance into social justice was, again, in the church, when I was learning about the Lubicon Indigenous folk in northern Alberta who never had a treaty and whose whole way of life was being destroyed because of the oil industry. Just moving in without permission because they didn't need it because there was no treaty. And I just knew that was wrong. And although I didn't have any kind of social connection with any of those people, and there's an inherent bias in kind of naming them as those people, I knew there was something in me as a social type that knew that disconnection was wrong and wanted to make it right. And I think that's, for me, that's what social justice is about. It's about identifying an injustice where something is wrong and working for change to make it right, whether that's a system or a relationship or a situation.
So I think we have one other question here for you. And that is, how can working on our instincts help us to address our prejudices?
How much time you got? I love it. I mean, so basically, and I'm trying to develop some more material around this, but basically, the most disintegrated parts of the type show up when we're leveraging our privilege against marginalized folks. And the way that we create repair is by using the coping skills of the healthiest and greatest gifts of our type. So as an Enneagram 7, it's really easy for me to look out at other 7s in society, white straight 7s in society, and see how they use humor to deflect from difficult conversations, reframing so that it's minimizing harm. This wasn't really that bad. Starting a bunch of initiatives around justice and not seeing any of them through because another new shiny thing has happened, the distractibility of that. And so it's easy for me to recognize that and say, like, white straight 7, you and I share a certain hard wiring that makes me empathize with you. And because of your social location, the unhealthy parts of your type, the suffering of your type, is rippling out to create suffering for marginalized people who are more marginalized than you. And likewise, I can go to that same straight white 7 and say, there is something within you, the healthiest parts of your type, that would actually allow you to create and contribute to justice in a really unique and important way. Because the healthiest parts of the 7 are able to find that deep serenity that's so important for that sobriety that's so important for engaging in hard conversations. A healthy 7 is able to see the beauty and hope of a situation in a way that doesn't cover up the difficulty of the situation. 7s are able to inspire people, and I just see every time that I'm engaging with someone who's a 7, like, there's so much potential as well as so much liability for justice. And part of the inner work has to be recognizing and continually shifting these instincts towards health, not only for the individual, but for all of society.
I guess the last question, then we'll have an open question at the end for you to share anything that you didn't get asked that you feel is important to say, is what are the barriers you face in the Enneagram community, if any?
Well, and I think these are barriers, general barriers for the Enneagram, is that there is so much theory. And we have so many different teachers that are looking at different nuances of different aspects of the Enneagram. And all of them are great, except they can encourage us to mainly be in our heads. And how do we really embody what's being said in a way that we're not constantly analyzing, but actually living into what it means to walk with another. And I can remember at past conferences where it was being challenged that, you know, when we're really present, we also help other people be present, and we can accept that the world is beautiful as it is. That's really easy when you're in a position of power. and I need to give a shout out to Dr. Deborah Egerton, who challenged that. And I also want to say thank you to her for developing a whole program as well around, well, she refers to it as idea work, being inclusive, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and anti-racism. And she's done a whole course, 10-month course, where we explored all sorts of different dynamics of the Enneagram and how that supports us or stops us from moving into action for social justice and stuff. So I do see things shifting within our Enneagram community. And I think it's just coming to a place of more wholeness, of more moving with our bodies and our hearts, and moving a bit beyond the conceptualization, but to how do we live this? How do we experience it? And I will say some of the barriers in the Enneagram community is all the newbies that capture on to all the theory of the books. And so it's really important for those of us who have studied it, etc., to create that place of coming back to our bodies and our hearts and our quiet minds to check out what's the realities of this moment.
I'm wondering, in all the years you worked in the Enneagram community and continue to work in this community, is what do you say are the challenges for our worldwide Enneagram community? And I guess I'm sort of thinking through the lens of the International Enneagram Association. And my sense is things have really just started to make some changes. And let's say my first conference of the IEA was in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And that's when those killings happened. And I just remember Jessica just mentioning that you and Jessica spoke up and said, hey, folks, we're here. Don't we have something to say? Don't we have something to address here? And my awareness is, it's just even in the last year or two that I'm starting to see more people talking about and workshops. And here's Sarah and I going to be doing a workshop. And you've been doing this for years, but it's, how do we have a healthy Enneagram community? Because I think we're discovering that our community is like anybody else. And there's a lot of asleep people, even though hopefully the Enneagram is waking us up. So any comments you have about that?
Well, for one thing, I believe that we all have to be the change that we want to see in the world. Mm-hmm. Right? The work begins with each one of us as individuals. And the work of the inner work that each of us needs to be doing in order to show up for ourselves and to show up for one another is real and intentional work. Many people find the Enneagram, and what happens is they get fascinated by the Enneagram and their type structure, and that's as far as it goes. But we have to move, particularly in the Enneagram community, from a mindset of me and mine to us and ours. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's the challenge that we face. There is too much going in, staying in, and not allowing the fruit of what happens when we go inward and we touch the center of our own hearts, we remember the connection that we have to essence. We remember the divine connection that exists. And so that is a beautiful, yummy, wonderful journey personally, individually. But when we look at the broader spectrum of what are we trying to accomplish, we're never going to elevate our consciousness alone. We have to do it as a community, and we have to elevate by connecting to one another and honoring all of humanity. The Enneagram is not just for some, it is for all. And if all we're doing is hoarding it for our own inner work, what's the point? What are we accomplishing? You know, and Sarah, you asked me about the instincts and I talked about the centers. I'm sorry, I get very excited about the centers because I always want to get that. I always
Good. Well, that's important too. That's really important.
It's very important.
I always want to get that part in there because to me, unless we activate our centers, it just doesn't work. You were saying, Roland, I've done this work for so long and I watch people taking the information in here. You know, they'll walk out and it's like, yeah, that was really interesting, but nothing happens. But when I watch people take the information in, I do a systemic timeline of systemic racism. And when I show those images and show what has happened, you know, from when the first slave boat landed here, all the way up to the present day, you know, the names of the people who have been murdered based on, you know, racist actions and bias and bigotry. I watch people's hearts break open. So now the false history narrative gets corrected. The heartbreak comes, and then there's the gut knowing, I can't just stand by and do nothing. I need to do something. And so that connection of our three centers is, to me, the most critical part of forming as an ally.
How can the Enneagram community be more welcoming to diversity?
Well, I think it's imperative that the Enneagram community understand the unique cultural values of different ethnic groups and to be able to market accordingly, right? So there are cultures out there. I'll just speak from my own firsthand experience. So Chinese American culture. This is not a culture that advocates for hanging your dirty laundry out there and introspecting about your flaws. You know, it's a 3-6-9 culture. It's a culture that values achievement. It's a culture that values conformity and peace. It's a culture that values due diligence and discernment in your practical decisions in life that pertain to career and family and education. And so is the question how to draw more diversity into the group?
How can we be more welcoming of people?
Oh yeah. So be more welcoming in understanding that the presentation of the Enneagram needs to be customized in a way that ethnic group is able to receive. Mm-hmm. You know, so if it's going to be like, hey, you know, come into this workshop and we're all going to do like triads of small group discussion about our feelings and our dirty laundry, it's not going to work for most Asian American demographic. You know, you got to come in and maybe in a lecture format first in order to get information and establish peace and safety and really tune into the value of the Enneagram as a potential tool for achievement as well. Right? You can use this tool in the workplace to communicate with your colleagues and communicate with your superiors. I mean, you got to frame the Enneagram in a way that that ethnic group understands and feels comfortable with. So that would be my primary answer.
So you've talked a little bit about some of the teachers in the Enneagram community. So I just kind of want to go back to the community of the Enneagram. And I'm curious if you have experienced any barriers within the Enneagram community, or if you've had some of those, or if you've seen that happen for other people, about the barriers you face.
Because I'm here, I mean, I'm not going actively, I'm not in person trainings. I don't know that I can really address that. I do think that, I think it was something that I saw with Russ online where he was like owning, and there was more stuff with Christopher.
Oh, Hewerts?
Yes, Hewerts. I never can pronounce his name. Hewerts, who I actually did part 3 training at the Institute with. I remember when that came out and there was all this flack about it. I can't say that I've seen anything like that. I think the trainings that I did the last 2 years have been with Andrea, and I certainly didn't feel that from our community, Sarah. I think sometimes talking about it, I can sense that people get a little uncomfortable. And I also can tell that sometimes people just change the subject because there's no easy answer here. This is not going to be a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
I do hope to see more and more people of color coming to Enneagram trainings and Enneagram workshops and becoming teachers themselves. And that I am looking for. I'm seeing it on these big conference things. That's what I do. I look at all the faces. Where's the...
And that's really shifting. It's really shifting.
Oh, and it's like,
because the first event that Sarah and I were at, we didn't actually meet each other at that event, was in Minneapolis just after the shootings. And it took Dr. Egerton and
Jessica did, I think,
to say, hey, we need to address this as an Enneagram community.